Hello and welcome back. I hope everyone is doing really well. Of course, this is going to be a dedicated video again to the Hedera/hbar ecosystem with a lot of emphasis on SaucerSwap v2. This should hopefully round up the series of videos I've recently done covering the launch of the v2 protocol to the Hedera ecosystem, of course delivered by the SaucerSwap team. In particular, this video is going to be covering impermanent loss and calculating things like swap fees, as well as the different types of impermanent loss you can experience in a CLMM or /Uniswap v3 style protocol, as opposed to an AMM liquidity pool, because it's very different and the formulas are actually quite complicated indeed to work out. First things first though, for Hedera, some really interesting news regarding smart contract verification. So Hedera are excited to announce the availability of smart contract verification on Hedera, bringing increased trust and transparency through the enablement of smart contract evaluation, ensuring alignment between deployed bytecode and its source files. Using the new service, all users on Hedera's network will be able to independently verify smart contracts and make informed decisions on whether a contract is worthy of interaction, bolstering security and driving community collaboration. We believe this service is a critical step forward for developers, enterprises, Web3 solution providers, end users, and should facilitate Hedera transactions to be secure and transparent. I've mentioned quite a few times on this channel in the past, the two biggest most important ways to stay safe in the crypto space is keeping seed phrases and private keys safe, that being number one priority, but the second priority is being very careful as to which source code from smart contracts and things like decentralized applications interact with your wallet to begin with. The number one way majority of people actually end up losing all of their cryptocurrency is they interact with a malicious decentralized application, which executes either a malicious piece of smart contract code, which empties their wallet, or simply they go to a malicious decentralized application and inherently pop in something like a seed phrase or private key just because they aren't aware of what they're doing or they aren't thinking in that moment. So they are the two golden rules, effectively: secure those private keys and seed phrases. And the second one being be very, very vigilant and careful with the decentralized applications, DEXs, etc. that you are integrating and interacting with within these different ecosystems. Always make sure you're checking URLs and that the product you are using, the service that is being provided to you, is safe and secure. You know, take a look at their Twitter. Are they active? Have they got Discord servers with lots of different users? Is there a community? Is there audits, etc., etc.? It's of paramount concern. Stuff like this, though, is fantastic for us to be able to evaluate smart contracts and verify that they're doing what they are saying they are doing. And of course, again, it's really good for things like mass onboarding moving forward into the future. Let me know if you guys want a dedicated video on this once it's fully rolled out, and I will do so. Jumping across then and looking at what SaucerSwap Labs have done since Friday, because of course v2 has gone live. In only 24 hours, they achieved just shy or around $8.5 million of total value locked. Top 7 out of 10 highest volume pools, of course, are now on the v2 protocol, and price impacts have been greatly reduced by an order of magnitude. Wanted to cover a little bit more in detail what this order of magnitude for reduced swaps being. If none of you even want to provide liquidity, one of the biggest improvements you will see from v2 going live, and why I was making such a fuss about it, is this improved capital efficiency. With SaucerSwap v2 trading something like 400,000 US dollars worth of hbarX for hbar in this sort of case would result in a 0.09% loss, which is over 90 times more efficient than v1's 8.26% loss, despite the fact you've got a lower TVL in that v2 pool. The v2 efficiency is significantly improved and it broadens opportunities in Hedera's DeFi. So even if you aren't interested in providing liquidity, but you just use SaucerSwap as a DEX per se to facilitate transactions between different tokens because you want to swap your source for some hbarX or your hbar for some source, for example, you should be benefiting now from these greatly reduced transaction fees effectively because of the efficiency of the liquidity that is actually being used behind the scenes to facilitate those trades. And you can see this very clearly in V1 here with the same slippage at 0.5%. The price impact of doing that trade on V1 was at nearly 8.5%, and that is reduced to literally sub 0.1% on V2 due to this improved capital efficiency. So that cannot be understated or underestimated as to how much of a benefit that is for the Hedera's end users that are using this decentralized application. And again, big kudos to the SaucerSwap Labs team themselves for pushing this out to all of us so quickly. The other thing I wanted to mention is probably a bit of a round of applause for the SaucerSwap team as well as the Hedera ecosystem. Major achievements have already been unlocked as part of the V2 launch. In under 48 hours from the launch of SaucerSwap V2, they achieved a remarkable $10 million in total value locked. V1 and V2's combined TVL now demonstrates a net liquidity inflow, with V2 specifically TVL-wise surpassing that of established CLMMs like SaucerSwap V3 on Ethereum. So yes, already SaucerSwap V2 has more total value locked within those particular contracts than the likes of SaucerSwap V3 over on Ethereum, which is massive to be saying, particularly because of how dominant SaucerSwap and things like Uniswap are as a incumbent effectively on Ethereum. There is massive amounts of sort of heritage and volume that goes through layer ones like Ethereum predominantly anyway. So the fact that SaucerSwap has already been surpassed by SaucerSwap V2 is something to behold. Okay then, as I said, many of you have been DMing me on the likes of Twitter and asking about how on earth do you calculate things like impermanent loss and swap fees on a CLMM. I'm on an online tool here called 𝗟𝗚𝗡𝗥𝗥𝗔𝗟𝗦. I'll leave this link down in the description for you guys, but I'll just be using it for illustrative purposes. I'll try and go through a more specific example and also leave you guys with a tool in the description of this video for something directly relating to the Hedera ecosystem. Now, the first thing to be said about providing liquidity is effectively it's a game of balancing risk. And what I mean by that is we are balancing the risk of impermanent loss with the yield we will be receiving from providing those tokens into that particular pool. Because of course, we are effectively receiving a portion of the fees. Our liquidity is effectively being used to facilitate trades between tokens on these decentralized exchanges. And then we receive a kickback of those fees in order as a reward for providing that liquidity. So we need to balance our risk effectively to ensure that we're earning yield wherever we possibly can, but also mitigating things like impermanent loss. Now, I'll preface all of this by saying that an AMM, of course, that homogeneous distribution, is actually fairly straightforward to calculate impermanent loss. I've actually got a dedicated video on the channel which looks at that. You guys are free to go back and look through that. And of course, that still applies to the V1 pools on SaucerSwap itself. The key takeaways though from impermanent loss across AMMs and CLMMs, which of course are heterogeneous in their nature of distribution. We've all seen these lovely depth charts. There's one here on the screen right now for this liquidity position. Is it's really about divergence and velocity of prices. What I mean by that is the value of the two different tokens that are supplied will dictate how aggressive the impermanent loss is. Therefore, if you are new to this, the first and foremost thing that I would suggest is looking for assets that effectively correlate in terms of price movements. There are some safe bets to always pick with this. The first, of course, being something like stablecoins. Providing liquidity to, say, USDC or USDT should result in almost no impermanent loss because, of course, they are pegged to $1. Now, the flip side of that being is because they are pegged to $1 and everyone wants to effectively provide liquidity to those because of the lack of impermanent loss, we've significantly reduced our risk, and therefore you are likely to see much lower yield for providing liquidity. Still not insignificant, but much lower than, so, say, some very volatile tokens. The other ones to look out for, which are really good for mitigating impermanent loss, are derivatives. Two I can think of immediately in the Hedera ecosystem are the likes of hbar and hbarx. hbarx, of course, being the Stader-derived token from the price of hbar, of course, continually increasing. Therefore, the correlation between those two assets is that the prices should move within tandem with a fixed percentage difference between them. The same can be said for the likes of Source and XSource, because XSource is effectively being derived from the price of Source. As Source moves up or down, XSource will follow the price of that particular token. If you don't believe me, you can literally go look on SaucerSwap directly at the yield, estimated yield within each of the pools. If you look for those token pairs, USDC, USDT, hbar, hbarx, and source x source, you'll probably notice that they are much lower in terms of the reward you'll receive for providing liquidity, and that's because you're not taking any inherent risk. Right then, so the difference being in a CLMM is, of course, we can effectively distribute our liquidity across a set of prices. You'll see these as min prices and max prices, and something known as the active tick or active price. The active tick or active price is effectively the active price for that particular pair of tokens. This is illustrated by this pink line we can see for this particular calculator, with the two green lines effectively showing my min and max prices. What you'll notice immediately is, if you keep an eye on this estimated fees number at the top here, the wider I make my range across this liquidity range and further away effectively from the active tick, the lower the fees I receive. Now, there is an inverse relationship between this. The wider the range I make myself in terms of around the current price of this particular pool, the less impermanent loss I am likely to experience. However, of course, I've mitigated that risk and I've lost my reward. If I drag these handles back in for the min and maxes, you'll immediately see continually my estimated fees continue to increase as I zone in around that current price tick. The observant of you immediately will notice, though, what happens if I move the current price, or the current price moves outside of my range. Well, if I increase my max range here and I pull my min above, immediately my estimated fees have dropped to 0. This works in both directions. So if the price falls below my min or goes above my max, suddenly I am earning no fees. And that is because I am providing liquidity to that section of the distribution for trades. Of course, no trades are taking place within that particular section because the price is outside of it. So of course, this is continually a balancing act of ensuring that you're setting a wide enough range that you're capturing fees, but also not too wide that you're effectively not capturing enough of the swap fees that are taking place. Hopefully that makes a bit more sense. So the closer you get to the price, the higher the reward. The further away you get from the price, the lower the reward, but the lesser the impermanent loss. And of course, the second thing to note as well is what happens when the token price falls below my minimum or rises above my maximum, is that we see 100% impermanent loss to the token pair. So in this instance, if I was to fall below my minimum price here, my entire token holding would be converted into wrapped Bitcoin. If the price raised above my max tick, everything would be converted into Ethereum in these particular scenarios. And of course, that could be reversed depending on which way you're looking at the particular pool. But you will effectively see 100% conversion, I should say, into one of the token pairs. That doesn't mean you've lost your complete position. It just means all of the tokens of your holding, if you supplied 50-50 to begin with, have now all been converted across into token A or token B, depending on the price movements. So of course, when you're setting up these kind of strategies, pick something you're comfortable with. Thankfully, on the SaucerSwap's website directly, they give you 3 different toggle options to come up with some strategies: aggressive, balanced, etc. Have a play around with those, and as I mentioned, potentially stick to some of the easier ones, such as derivatives or stables to begin with, because you're less likely to experience the volatility that is required to cause impermanent loss. Right then, so we understand how we effectively earn fees by setting up these liquidity positions. Let's take a quick look at what we could expect to happen based on some volatility scenarios. Here's a calculator that I found online from Flipside Crypto, which really nicely has a lot of the formulas below effectively calculating for you. Of course, all of the tierly green inputs you have to make yourself, which I've just done from Paul around half an hour or so ago. This is up to date as I can potentially get it. I'll leave this link down in the description for you guys below for you to create your own copy of this spreadsheet, and you can run through some scenarios. There's 2 different tabs, your calculations, and as I mentioned, the formulas for calculating things like impermanent loss and yield, etc. on a CLMM are nowhere near as easy as an AMM, and you can see things here. Calculate liquidity numbers, for example, quite a mean looking formula if you take a look through some of these. Anyway, let's take a quick look at this. I've set up a pool scenario here, hbar source, 0.3% pool fee, token 0 being hbar, token 1 being source. roughly what the 5-day swap volume is. Again, all these statistics are available directly on SaucerSwap V2's interface. You guys can sort of create your own scenario based on more up-to-date numbers as to when you are viewing this. What we can see here though is if I set my lower bound range at 2 and my upper bound range at 3, I'm looking down here at rows 35 and 36 in particular, my liquidity share is 6.7%. So this is quantifying what I was showing you guys before. If I set a wider range, say 1 and 3, you see my liquidity share drop drastically down to 3%. That's immediately going to mean that I'm earning less fees from that, which you saw the estimated daily fees begin to drop because I'm further away from the swap range that is taking place because of the current pool price being 2.57. Again, if I move that really close into that range, you can see my liquidity share jumps back up to 13% because my tokens effectively are being used more frequently than someone else's distributed liquidity because I am much closer to that current pool price. Of course, inherently, that may end up meaning that I lose out to impermanent loss in the long term. Right, then I'll leave that as it is, my lower bound being 2.5 and my upper range being 3.0. And let's play around with some future calculations or forecasting. I've got modified some of these formulas just so I can spin up some different percentage moves here. The interesting thing you want to be looking at here is my position versus hodl. So this is effectively if I just held these tokens versus providing liquidity. In this instance, if I saw a 1% increase in the hbar price based on my upper and lower ranges, I'd be better off by 30 cents of just holding. This is a USD investment of $1,000 split between $840 of hbar to begin with and $160 of source. Now, as that hbar price has increased by 1%, we can see the new pool price has moved to 2.6. Originally, it was at 2.57. As a result of that, where that position value is coming in, we can start to see how the impermanent loss takes effect. So my new hbar USD value is $792. And don't forget, I provided around $840 into this particular pool. And my source token value, though, instead is now $216. My position value overall is still in the positive, but the percentage allocation between those two assets has begun to diverge. And again, the more I scale this up, the more you can see. So in this instance, the higher the hbar price moves, the lower I tend to have in terms of USD in hbar, the more I have in source. And vice versa, if I increase now the source token by say 5%, again, my new pool price is 2.52. So I'm still within my lower bound and my upper bound. So I'm still earning fees, but you can see my token balances are fluctuating greatly between them. Now, of course, these are moving in the same direction. If I was to drop this out here by, say, reducing the source price by 5%, and let's say hbar went up by 5%, so they've now diverged, this is when we're going to start seeing amounts of impermanent loss and potentially position loss across them. So you can now see my new hbar USD value is around $300. My source value is $700, a far cry away from the $160 of source that I provided to begin with, and $840 of hbar. So you can see it's moved from token A to token B. It's shifted across. Now, in terms of the actual total value, though, I'm at $1,005. But if I just held those two tokens through the price changes, I would be net $1,034. So you can see my position value versus holding, I'm down nearly $30 in this scenario. Of course, we can look at changing things like days held, etc. But I think this begins to illustrate what's happening. Now, more importantly, if I see a drastic drop of say 10% in one of the tokens, and let's just say hbar kind of flatlines, what we can begin to see is my position is now almost converted completely into source, and I've nearly got no hbar left. And if I keep moving this until we get to a pool price that falls outside of my range, so there we go, got a pool price that now falls outside of my range, you can see I've got 100% movement across into source. I no longer hold any hbar tokens whatsoever because how drastic this price move was. My original pool price was 2.57 with my upper bound being 3, if you remember that I set. We're now at a pool price of 3.09, and I've effectively got 100% source in this instance, $907 of it, nearly 46,000 tokens, and I am net negative in this particular position. And actually, I would have been better off not providing any liquidity in the first place. Now, of course, these are very drastic scenarios, but hopefully this gives you an impression of what can happen to your position. Hopefully you can play around with this particular calculator to better work out what might happen based on how you're providing liquidity. Set your own upper and lower bounds. Maybe look at some charts for the recent volatility between those tokens. Over the last 30 days, what kind of price range have I moved within? And then you'll begin to understand how token price increases will affect your impermanent loss in a CLMM. Anyway, guys, hopefully this has helped you. Like I said, this is not as easy as an AMM. I'll leave all these links down in the description. If you've got a comment, feel free to drop it below. I do try and reply to as many of them as I possibly can. Until the next one, I'll catch you then. Cheers.